Let me start by saying the underlying business is performing well, Kirsten. You see that coming through in our cost control, our production results, where we've seen not only record first half shipments in our iron ore business, but 14% growth in our high quality steelmaking coal business in Queensland and 10% growth in our copper business. If I come to your question on tariffs, the first order impacts for BHP in terms of US tariffs are not significant, given we only have about 3% of our revenue being generated in the US. But of course, we need to keep an eye on what happens with tariffs and counter tariffs in terms of the effect on the overall global economy.
But how will the US-China trade war, which looks set to take off from here, impact the company?
So there's two parts to the answer. One is, what do we expect to happen in China? And we all have to recognize that China is exporting less to the US now than it was, say, a decade ago. And they've developed other markets elsewhere. We also know that the Chinese government has reiterated its pro-growth stance. And we believe that they will calibrate their policy measures to reinforce the growth in the domestic economy and consumption, basis what they're seeing by way of challenges in export markets. So they have a number of levers available to them to pull to deal with any headwinds. Now, if we then come back to the BHP business, we are so well positioned in terms of where we sit on the cost curve, our average margins, and the growth optionality that we've spoken about is exactly that. So we'll calibrate the reinvestment into long-term value growth for shareholders in copper and potash, depending upon what we see by way of external market circumstances, and of course the attractiveness of the underlying projects as we bring them to full maturity.
Does the volatility mean BHP is going to look more critically at its Australian operations, particularly whether to boost iron ore production in WA further?
So volatility and overall policy settings, in particular our ability to be competitive here in Australia, will of course be a factor in considering whether we pull the trigger on, in this case, expansion of the iron ore business to 330 million tonnes per annum. It will be driven in part by what we see in terms of the market outlook, but we also have to look at returns and risk associated with the project. The work is underway currently. We'll have studies completed by the end of this calendar year to tell us then whether the project looks attractive on a standalone basis. And there is a higher order point, though, that I do wish to make here, and that is that our advocacy around ensuring that we've got policy settings that enable us to be competitive isn't just about BHP's iron ore business. It's not even just about BHP. This is a national consideration where we're saying that the opportunity at hand for Australia is great. In a world where population is growing, standards of living are rising, where we have the decarbonisation and digitization thematics playing out, the world's going to need a lot more metals and minerals. And Australia is a resource-rich nation. It's going to face headwinds in some of the commodities that have traditionally underpinned the Australian economy, but there's opportunity ahead in other commodities. However, we're less advantaged in those commodities than we've been in the historical commodities. We do have to compete head-to-head with countries in South America, North America, Africa for opportunities in commodities like copper. And so it's going to be even more important that we as businesses, together with governments, both at the state and the federal levels, lean into ensuring that we've got settings here that enable us to continue to compete against countries, frankly, that are making bold, aggressive moves to shore up their own competitiveness, and we need to keep pace with that.
BHP's results noted variable Australian power prices. Is Australia's current renewables push to net zero, in your view, the right path, or does nuclear energy have a place here?
So, of course, Australia needs affordable, reliable energy on its path towards net zero. So we are supporters of moving towards net zero over time. But we're also supporters of saying that the path towards that should be technology neutral. So all technologies should be able to compete on an equal footing, and those technologies that give rise to the most reliable energy at the lowest possible cost, whilst keeping the country on path towards net zero, those should be the winners at the end of the day. And so in the case of nuclear, we are supportive of it being considered as part of the mix along with all other technologies.
And BHP would then be well placed to increase uranium production in South Australia.
That's indeed true. We currently produce about 6% of the world's uranium. It's a golden opportunity for not only the company, but South Australia and Australia overall to meet any growth in global demand in uranium.
Mike Henry, great to speak to you.
Thank you. Good to speak to you as well.